concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, and I'm pleased the question time at least is happening, Mr Speaker. My question time is to the Prime Minister. Now in its 7th year, the government has got to the point where it won't support freedom of the press, won't support the freedom to protest and won't support freedom of association, and now won't support debate in Australia's parliament. When the Prime Minister talks about quiet Australians, doesn't he actually mean silent Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
We heard from quiet Australians.
On the night of the election, I thanked all those Australians who go about their lives honestly, decently, with their aspirations. And they're the Australians, Mr Speaker, that our government spoke directly to, Mr Speaker. And those Australians, Mr Speaker, endorsed the program and the agenda and the objectives and the work program of this government. And that program, Mr Speaker, was to ensure that we kept our economy strong to guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. Those Australians, Mr Speaker, had grown completely tired of the games that are played in Canberra and the confected drama, Mr Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition has spent a career in politics pursuing. This is a Leader of the Opposition who's more interested in the drama and theatre of politics in Canberra than he is.
The member for Ballarat will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, it goes to relevance. The question I asked was about the ramming through of this parliament without a single word of debate.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition well knows he mentioned a number of things in the question, including a very wide-ranging question in the final sentence. The Prime Minister is in order.
Mr Speaker, what those Australians and their decent and honest aspirations wanted was a government that backs their men and believes in them and isn't going to engage in the tawdry political games and the toing and throwing in this place, Mr Speaker. This is a Leader of the Opposition who has spent his political career focused on the bubble of this place, Mr Speaker, not on the issues of economic management, national security. He spent a couple of months on the NSC and the ERC and government. Mr Speaker, I did not say that at all, Mr Speaker.
The Manager of Opposition
I said
Business.
The Leader of the Opposition did not spend any time on an ERC that produced a budget. And he didn't, Mr Speaker. He spent a couple of months there.
The member for Scullin, the member for Shortland.
Only interested in the tawdry drama of Canberra, not interested in the hard work of policy which guarantees a strong economy, which ensures that we can protect national security. And we saw this yesterday, Mr Speaker, in this parliament, where once again, under the directions of the Leader of the Opposition, he said vote again to keep our borders soft. That's what the Leader of the Opposition stands for. The Leader of the Opposition at the last election did not get the message from the Australians he speaks about. They said no to their $387 billion of higher taxes, but he continues to keep them. They said no to Labor's lax policy on border protection. He's decided to keep it, Mr Speaker. There is no difference between this Leader of the Opposition and the former one, Mr Speaker. They are birds of the same feather, and they cannot manage money and they cannot protect national security, and the Australian people know it.
The member for Petrie on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Just on reflecting on members, the member for Shortland should withdraw the comments he made about the Prime Minister there.
I asked the member for Shortland whether he made an unparliamentary remark. The member for Shortland, having acknowledged he did, will withdraw.
I withdraw calling the Prime Minister a liar.
The member for Shortland will leave under Standing Order 94A. The member for STURT has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
We live in the best country in the world, and I am confident about Australia's future. Will the Prime Minister advise the House how the Morrison government is getting on with the job of securing Australia's future?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When I went to the Governor-General earlier this year and called the general election, Mr Speaker, what I said was that we would create another 1.25 million new jobs, Mr Speaker, over the next 4 years, and since that election in May, almost 70,000 new jobs have been created. What I said when I went to the Governor-General and stood before the Australian people is I said we will maintain budget surpluses without increasing taxes and pay down the debt. And this year, Mr Speaker, the budget is in surplus. And that is the first time that has happened in 12 years, Mr Speaker, and we are committed to keeping it that way so we can reduce the debt and not put the burden of the current generation on future generations. That is the legacy we inherited from the former government, the former Labor government, Mr Speaker, and we have spent the last 6 years cleaning up their fiscal mess. And now, after 6 years, we've been able to bring the budget back to surplus, and that means, Mr Speaker, that means that we can pay down the debt and ensure that we do not put that burden on future generations. I said, Mr Speaker, we would deliver tax relief to the Australian people, and we have done so in spades, Mr Speaker. I said that I wanted Australians to keep more of what they earn, and that is what we have delivered in these first 6 months alone, Mr Speaker. I said we would do for small business, giving them support, and through the work of the deregulation work done by the Treasurer and the Assistant Minister, the Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, we are delivering on those deregulation targets, and in particular removing the regulation that enables a sole operator to employ their first person. Our government's about jobs, Mr Speaker, and our government is delivering on jobs, and we're removing the burdens that get in the way that prevent small businesses to employ people. I said that we would keep Australians safe, and that is what we have done, with record funding to our security agencies, record funding to our defence industries, and backing them up with the laws dealing with everything from countering foreign interference to ensuring that we're protecting children from child abuse, Mr Speaker. And what we have done is, I said we would do that and we would keep our borders secure, and yesterday we kept that promise to the Australian people, Mr Speaker, and we learned of the Labor Party, who has learned absolutely nothing from the Australian people and the last election, where they say they will have no truck with a party that will not keep the borders secure, and that's why Labor rejected. I said we would guarantee increased funding, record funding for hospitals and schools and disability services. All of this is being delivered in a surplus budget, Mr Speaker, without the need to increase taxes as those opposite propose to do, and we could do so while reducing debt at the same time. Mr Speaker, that's what I promised to do when I went to the election in May, and that's what our government is delivering.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why has the Prime Minister failed to bring on legislation arising from the Banking Royal Commission that he voted against 26 times, but instead today broken all precedent by ramming through this House his extreme anti-union legislation without a word being spoken that was only rejected by the parliament last week?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As Treasurer, I introduced the law to this parliament which ensure banking executives who do the wrong thing not only get prosecuted, Mr Speaker, not only which saw the biggest corporate fine ever delivered to a company in this country as a result of the prosecutions that took place under my watch, Mr Speaker. I introduced laws which meant the banking executives who do the wrong thing should be punted from the banking industry forever.
Member for Scullin.
Now, that's what I did on the banks, Mr Speaker, and those opposite sought to frustrate it. Now those opposite don't want union thugs who attack women being called to account and kicked out of their jobs, Mr Speaker. Now, we stand up for what we believe on this side of the House, and we believe ugly militant unionism should have no place in this country. Clearly, the Leader of the Opposition believes that it does by the way he has acted in this place and frustrated and sought to oppose this bill, Mr Speaker. But I'll ask the Treasurer to add to the answer.
Members on my left, the member for Cooper, the Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. When we released our implementation plan
to the Royal Commission, we said by the end of this year more than 20 commitments would either be implemented or before the Parliament, and I'm pleased to tell the House that it is actually 24, Mr Speaker. It's actually 24, and the speed at which we have responded to the Banking Royal Commission is in stark comparison to the record of those opposite when they had the Cooper Review, which was provided to them in 2010. The first piece of legislation was introduced in the Parliament in November 2011, 16 months after the completion of the review, Mr Speaker. And their experience with FOFA, and Mr Speaker, that experience, again, it took almost 23 months from when the PJC tabled its report to when the legislation was introduced. And, Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to say that last week I introduced into the House an omnibus bill which would extend the unfair contract terms to insurance contracts, which would ensure adequate consumer protection provisions that apply to funeral expense policies, and that would introduce a best interest duty requirement for mortgage brokers and reform mortgage broker remuneration. Mr Speaker, only this side of the House can be relied on to implement the recommendations out of the Royal Commission.
The member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. And, Mr Speaker, I am confident about Australia's future. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is working to make it even better by delivering $100 billion of infrastructure? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you.
Just before I call the Deputy Prime Minister can resume his seat. The member for Hunter on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I take a point of order, understanding Order 98DI, around expressions of opinion. It's very clear that the Deputy Prime Minister doesn't have any opinion on anything.
The member for Hunter knows that is a frivolous point of order, as he well knows, and he will leave the chamber understanding Order 94A. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, the average IQ of the chamber just went up. Thank the member for Wide Bay. See you, Joel. Have a nice Christmas, mate.
The Deputy Prime Minister. I'm just going to ask the Deputy Prime Minister to withdraw that remark.
The truth is a defence. Happy Christmas.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
You have the call for the time being, Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wide Bay, Mr Speaker. And as we do approach Christmas, Mr Speaker, I want to thank the member for Wide Bay for his advocacy for road safety, and I'm sure the Shadow Infrastructure Minister would also agree that as we lead up to Christmas, road safety is important, and what we do in the infrastructure space, Mr Speaker, plays a lot into the aspect of ensuring that our roads are safer and that people get home to where they need to be sooner and safer. And we certainly want everybody to drive safely over the Christmas period. Mr Speaker, I too agree with the member for Wide Bay that we are confident about our nation, and we believe our best days for this country are indeed ahead of us. We know that when you spend $100 billion on infrastructure, whether it's road, rail, aviation or water infrastructure, Mr Speaker, all being invested and delivered through the record infrastructure spending, that the best days of the nation must surely be ahead. ABS data has shown that we've posted a record $21.1 billion trade surplus in the September quarter, and that's on the back of largely what we've done in the infrastructure space, making sure that products can get to port and therefore to markets sooner, Mr Speaker. Our $100 billion pipeline of investment includes, Mr Speaker, the $9.3 billion for the Inland Rail. And I know how delighted the member for Groom is, but other members as well. The member for Parks. Indeed, Mr Speaker, that was a significant day last week when the Queensland Government signed up to that intergovernmental agreement for Inland Rail. for Inland Rail. Now, in the members' electorate of Wide Bay, Mr Speaker, there's been no greater champion of the Section D, the Bruce Highway from Cooroy to Curra. He certainly has advocated for it. He has delivered it, Mr Speaker, and we're delivering on projects right now from the Pilbara to the East Coast, Mr Speaker. Duplication of the Pacific Highway in New South Wales is almost complete. Princess Highway in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, upgrades from one end to the other. The Outback Way, Australia's longest shortcut, it's getting on with more infrastructure spend. That will benefit Western Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, a great Northern Highway in WA. Of course, we've mentioned the mighty Bruce, the Toowoomba Second Range Crossing, again for the member for Groom, Mr Speaker. So important. The Echuca-Moama Bridge in the electorates of Nichols and Farrer, they know how important this bridge is to ensuring that product gets to where it needs to be. The Mary Lees Bridge at Carrathool. I could go on. I'm asked about alternatives. Those opposite only wish they had as much money to spend on infrastructure when they were in government as we do now.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again addressed to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister prevent any member of the opposition or crossbenchers from speaking on his flawed union-bashing bill when he rammed it through this House today? Why does this Prime Minister not respect the democratic process?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, this bill, this matter, the issue of dealing with thuggish militant unionism, Mr Speaker, is something the Australian people wanted us to address, and I will stand up for them in this place and ensure that we do not back down to the intimidation that has come and seeking to thwart our efforts to ensure that we can bring safety to workplaces by ensuring that thugs get given the punt, Mr Speaker. That's what we're seeking to do. We stand up for what we believe in. Mr Speaker, this bill, this matter had been through this place before.
The member for
Kingston.
Kingston.
It had been up in the Senate before, Mr Speaker. It went through some 15, 16 hours of debate in the other place. Everybody's position is known about this, Mr Speaker. We are not going to play the games of the Labor Party seeking to delay getting union thugs off workplace sites where they abuse women, Mr Speaker, where they abuse other fellow Australians. We will not put up with that, Mr Speaker. The Australian people will not put up with that, and we will ensure there is integrity in the workplace to ensure that Australians are kept safe. We know of cases in Queensland, Mr Speaker, where even union officials would not go onto the sites of other union officials because they would be intimidated by other union officials. The Leader of the Opposition, the Labor Party's eyes are completely closed to the thuggishness that they support.
Will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The question went directly to the anti-democratic and authoritarian behaviour of this Prime Minister in not allowing any debate whatsoever.
So the Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The question asked the Prime Minister those questions, and his answer is being relevant to the question. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. From the very first day I was sworn in a minister, and to this day, Mr Speaker, I have always sought to protect Australia from thugs. One of my first actions as Minister for Immigration was to ensure the rebel bikie gang leader, Alex Vella, never returned to Australia, Mr Speaker. I will stand up against thugs. The Labor Party stands up for thugs.
The member for Gorton is now warned, as is the member for Moreton. The member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Our future workforce needs university-educated employees, particularly across aged care, healthcare, education and disability, and nowhere more so than in regional, rural and remote Australia. Yet rural and regional Australians obtain these qualifications at a lower than average rate. 44% of Melburnians hold a bachelor or higher degree, compared with only 11% in Albury-Wodonga and 8% in Mildura. There is huge untapped potential for rural and regional Australians to meet these skills shortages. The government's NAPTHINE review provides the blueprint for doing this. Will the government commit the funding to implement the review's recommended actions?
The Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Indi for a question. And it's a very important question because we do have to lift the attainment rates in regional and rural areas, and I know that, like her, the members for Grey, Forest, Barker, Murray, Parkes, Gippsland, Durack and all the regional and rural members on this side of the House want to lift that attainment rate, and that is why we commissioned the former Premier of Victoria, Dennis Napthine, to undertake his review. And he has handed down an incredibly comprehensive review, 7 recommendations, 7 key recommendations. First, improve access to tertiary study options for students in regional and rural and remote areas. Second, improve access to financial support to support greater fairness and more equal opportunity. Third, improve the quality and range of student support services. Fourth, build aspiration, and I know that's something all of us want to see when it comes to regional and rural students. Fifth, improve participation and outcomes for regional, rural and remote students from equity groups, including low SES students. Sixth, strengthen the role of tertiary education providers in regional development and grow Australia's region. And the final one is establish mechanisms to coordinate the implementation effort and support monitoring of the strategy. And the Morrison government has agreed to all these recommendations and will over time begin implementing. And those opposite laugh, they have no interest in this subject whatsoever. And we have started. We have started. And can I say to all members of the House, especially those on this side that are interested in this subject, nominations close on Friday the 13th of December for the next round of our regional university centres, and I know there will be one going into Wangaratta. But to all members, we extended the deadlines for those nominations because of droughts, because of fires, to give communities an extra couple of weeks to be able to apply. So please say to all the regions, all the areas who want greater higher education participation, get your nominations in for this very important recommendation. Over $500 million has already been provided since 2016 to lift participation for regional and rural higher education in our regions. We want to continue delivering. That's why we put in place a new scholarship program to lift students going from other places to regional and rural areas to study, to bring international students to regional and rural areas to study. We have an ambitious agenda to improve higher education attainment in regional and rural Australia, and we will deliver on it.
The member for Bowman.
Speaker, a question to the Treasurer. We are confident about Australia's future, so I ask the Treasurer to outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make it even better through strong budget management and by paying down, Labor debt down. Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The member for McEwen, the member for Solomon. I haven't called you yet. Member for Cooper, the Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Bowman for his question and acknowledge his extensive experience as a medical professional before he came into this place, and that in his electorate more than 60,000 taxpayers will get the full will get the benefit of the tax cuts that we have passed through this parliament, and more than 16,000 small businesses will be able to access the instant asset write-off which we passed through the parliament, Mr Speaker. Now, can I inform the House that yesterday the national accounts were released, which showed that the Australian economy is enjoying its 29th consecutive year of economic growth, and we can be confident about Australians' economic future, with household disposable income having its fastest increase in a decade, Mr Speaker. And the current account surplus is we have a current account which is in surplus for the first time in 40 years. We have welfare dependency, which is at its lowest level in 30 years. We have the biggest tax cuts in 20 years, and we have the first balanced budget in 11 years, Mr Speaker, and we have more people in work than ever before, Mr Speaker. That is what this government has helped achieve. Now, Mr Speaker, through this year we have taken through the parliament legislation to ensure $158 billion of tax cuts, abolishing a full tax bracket, the 37 cents in the dollar tax bracket, and we'll see 94% of taxpayers pay a marginal rate of no more than 30 cents in the dollar. We've extended the instant asset write-off, Mr Speaker, to companies with a turnover of up to $50 million, and we've extended to $30,000. We've also backed small business with a $2 billion securitisation fund. We're also ensuring that consumers will be able to get better deals on their banking services, on their energy, on their telecommunication, with the consumer data right being passed through the parliament, and also the Protecting Your Super legislation, Mr Speaker, which will deal with excessive fees as well as unwanted or unnecessary insurance and super, Mr Speaker. And our priorities going forward include restoring the budget back into the black with the first surplus in 12 years, Mr Speaker, and paying down Labor's debt, with cutting red tape and the deregulation agenda, Mr Speaker, which will make it easier to employ people, Mr Speaker, as well as getting faster approvals for major projects. With infrastructure spending, $100 billion, a 10-year pipeline of infrastructure spending, the largest this country has ever seen, as well as guaranteeing essential services. But, Mr Speaker, it's all about creating more jobs and cutting taxes. And we know the Labor Party, with its $387 billion of higher taxes, will always see fewer jobs and lower wages. Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House will create more jobs.
The Treasurer's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is again addressed to the Prime Minister, who this year promised to make a strong economy even stronger. That didn't happen, did it, Prime Minister? Hasn't the Prime Minister given Australians weaker economic growth, weaker wages growth, lower business investment, higher unemployment and underemployment, and the worst Labor productivity growth on record?
The Treasurer, Mr Cole.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition asked about productivity. Under the Coalition, multi-factor productivity has averaged 0.7% above its 20-year average of 0.5%, and more than double the average under the previous Labor government of just 0.3%, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, we know that when we came to government, unemployment was at 5.7%. Today, it's 5.3%. We've got more women in work, more seniors in work, more young people in work, Mr Speaker, with more than 1.4 million new jobs having been created. And, Mr Speaker, when it comes to debt, the Labor Party were the gold standard of lifting debt, Mr Speaker. Debt was growing.
The Treasurer will pause. The question made no reference to debt. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When it comes to creating more jobs and boosting the economy, the Coalition can be trusted to make the Australian economy stronger for future generations.
The member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. We are all confident about Australia's future. Therefore, will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make it even better by keeping Australians safe, including by cracking down on illegal drugs? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Home Affairs has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and all of us on this side of the House want to make sure that we can put more investment into the Australian Federal Police, into our agencies otherwise within the Home Affairs portfolio, because we want to keep Australians safe, Mr Speaker. And in the last budget, we put an additional $615 million into the AFP, and specifically with a mandate of trying to stop those importations of drugs, particularly ice, which is a life-destroying drug, and in many regional towns across the country now. I want to say to mums and dads and community leaders who are living with this scourge every day that we are doing more than ever to try and clean up this problem, particularly in regional areas, but in our capital cities and out at metropolitan areas as well. And, Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to advise the House that the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Border Force have executed 13 search warrants on premises, vehicles and persons across Victoria, and so far arrested 3 Australians. The activity in relation to this operation, Australia's largest ever onshore ice seizure and the largest heroin seizure for over 2 years. Together, the AFP and the ABF have prevented over 1.6 tonnes of ice and heroin from reaching the Australian community. So they've seized 1,594 kilos of ice with an estimated street value of $1.1 billion and 37 kilograms of heroin with an estimated street value of $18.5 million. So, Mr Speaker, are we doing all that we can to make sure that young Australians have a brighter future? Absolutely we are. We want to make sure that there is awareness, that there's health support for people that are addicted to drugs. We want to make sure that where communities need support, we will provide that support. And so the attack on the scourge of drugs by the Morrison government is something that is taken up by every department of this Commonwealth. We want to make sure, Mr Speaker, not only can we help the police stop these importations taking place and stop these drugs getting into the bodies of young teenagers and Australians of all ages, we want to make sure that we invest across, as I say, that education space, which is important, but also the investment into health as well. And I want to commend all of the officers from the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Border Force, the agencies otherwise, Victorian Police and others who would have been involved in this investigation. This investigation is ongoing. It's one of many that the AFP has control of at the moment. And I want to send a very clear message to those people, particularly outlaw motorcycle gang members who are the biggest distributors of ice and amphetamines in our country, that this Morrison government will make sure we can do everything to keep Australians safe, to make sure that the future of this country is as bright as it humanly can be, and we are determined, Mr Speaker, to continue to support the Australian Federal Police.
Has concluded. The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This year the Prime Minister pledged to, quote, build an even stronger economy. But that hasn't happened, has it, Prime Minister? Don't we have a weakening economy, reduced investment, flat wages and rising unemployment?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Shadow Treasurer referred to investment, Mr Speaker. I can confirm that under the Coalition, investment outside the mining sector has increased by 34% since we've come to office, or over 5% per year. Now, Mr Speaker, under the Labor Party, investment outside the mining sector fell by 10% during their time in office, including an 8.5% fall in their last year. And as I said, when we came to government, unemployment was 5.7%. Today it's 5.3%, and more than 1.4 million jobs have been created. Mr Speaker, don't look what Labor says, look what Labor does. And when it comes to delivering lower taxes and more jobs, only the Coalition can deliver that to the Australian people.
The member for Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
No, actually, I'm sorry, the member for Cooper. The call needs to alternate. That's my error. That's okay. You know, he was. The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment, and I share the confidence of my colleagues expressed in Australia's future. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make this future even better through its plans for a cleaner environment and its approach to waste reduction? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Environment has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to take a question from the member for Wentworth, who's very credentialed to deliver that message of confidence in our economy. And indeed, Australia's iconic environment is part of our national identity, but can only be protected and preserved through a strong economy. And it's only possible with the investment that this government is delivering. Our 2019-20 budget and our plan for a cleaner environment will support practical, meaningful action through a range of commitments, including our $100 million Environment Restoration Fund, which supports major projects that deliver long-lasting conservation benefits, river restoration, threatened species safe havens and targeted funding to recover species at risk. Our Communities Environment Program, $150,000 for each electorate. It's Labor's only policy. We're extending it to them. There are no other policies from Labor to support and protect the environment, but we've included you in the Communities Environment Program, and we know that you're very thankful, backbenchers, for that. Just this week, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty, and I announced a further $58.8 million towards the construction of a paved runway at the Davis Research Station. And this reaffirms our $2.2 billion commitment to our Antarctic program. And how could that possibly be delivered without the strength of the economy that this government presides over? We've extended the number of Indigenous protected areas
Member for Griffith.
from 75 to 87, and those Indigenous protected areas deliver important environmental, economic, social and cultural outcomes. Our recycling investment plan is all about generating the circular economy within Australia, remanufacturing, driving investment, creating new jobs, because for every 10,000 tonnes of waste you create at least 9 new jobs. I haven't even touched, Mr Speaker, on land care, on marine parks, as I said, on threatened species and turning around the trajectory of some of our endangered species. But from a perspective of alternative policies, and the Labor Party is very noisy, we've had to go way back to cash for clunkers, to the Green Start loans, loans that never happened, to a $50 reward card that was never delivered to any businesses. And it's beyond the memory of most of the Labor Party members sitting in this House, but there is no policy for the environment from them. We're supporting our conservation volunteers, we're supporting our farmers, we're supporting our cutting-edge environmental scientists, and we're protecting the environment, strengthening the economy and building a better Australia.
The member for Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 80 days ago, I asked the Prime Minister how many registered aged care facilities do not have a registered nurse on site 24 hours a day. The Prime Minister said he would give me an answer, but he never did. Why can't the Prime Minister be truthful?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for a reminder about this matter, and I will take that matter up and ensure that we get an answer back, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left. Members on my left. Member for Lyons.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In those past 80 days, as the member will know, the government received the interim report of the Royal Commission into aged care, Mr Speaker, and I take the interjection from the Leader of the Opposition, and it is very distressing, what was reported in that report, Mr Speaker. And as that report reflected, this deals with issues that have been endemic in the aged care sector over a very long period of time, and the government is seeking to address the challenges in aged care, which are significant and substantial. And we're seeking to do that in a bipartisan way in this place, and to work with all members who I'm absolutely sure that all members will understand the sensitivity of looking after our parents and our elderly loved ones as they are going to aged care facilities, Mr Speaker. In our response to that aged care interim report, we have done 3 things, and we have addressed the very issues that they have raised. We have increased the number of places for in-home aged care, but not just increased it through an increased funding response of almost $500 million, Mr Speaker, but to reform the very system that delivers in-home aged care places. We have also addressed the issue of chemical restraints that are used in aged care facilities, and I commend the Minister for Health for the work that he is doing with the sector, but also with the pharmaceuticals industry and with the Pharmacy Guild. And this is a very important issue, and they will continue to address those matters. And thirdly, it was to address the very real issue of young people who are going into aged care facilities. And the truth is that figure has fallen under our government, Mr Speaker. It's fallen, I think, by about 600 from when we came to government, and that is important, and we are reducing the flow of young people going into aged care places, and we're doing that by making sure we can get the investment into proper accommodation facilities for those young people. Now, I note those interjecting and screaming out. They're an angry lot today, Mr Speaker. But this is a very serious issue, and if the opposition is prepared to work with the government to ensure we address the reforms coming out of the Royal Commission, Mr Speaker, then we're very happy to do that. We certainly did that with the Labor Party when they were in government, when they were addressing very important aged care reforms, and we supported them, Mr Speaker, and I would invite them to engage with us on this issue rather than dealing with it in a partisan way.
Members on my left, the member for Moreton has been warned. That's his final interjection. The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. I'm certainly confident about Australia's future. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make it even better through its plan to secure essential medicines for all Australians? And is the minister aware of any other alternative approaches?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Higgins because I'm confident too that we are making life better for Australians through the provision of essential services and, in particular, essential medicines. And I do absolutely say making life better because, as the member knows as well as anybody here, there was a time when a previous government, not that long ago, stopped the listing of essential services, stopped the listing of medicines, as the budget of the day said, and I quote, "Due to fiscal circumstances, the government will defer the listing of some new medicines until fiscal circumstances."
The member for Macarthur on a point of order, and you need to state the point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On relevance, is the minister aware of the present time?
No, the member for Macarthur will resume his seat. Member for Macarthur will resume his seat. To say to the member for Macarthur, a point of order can't be stated and then a question asked. The Minister for Health has the call.
And those medicines, which the member for Macarthur, amongst others, would well know were deferred, included medicines for endometriosis and IVF, medicines for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma, medicines for schizophrenia as well as for severe skin conditions. But things have changed, including the pace at which these medicines are being listed. A 40% reduction, I'm advised by the department, in the time to list new medicines under this government. And this year, 334 new and amended medicines on our watch, in our time, making a difference to patients. And over the course of the life of this government, 2,285 new and amended medicines. And that includes where we started this year with the Prime Minister, the listing of Tagrisso, a medicine that would otherwise have cost over $88,000 for a genetic-based lung cancer for over 400 patients, medicines such as Opdivo for melanoma, which would cost over $250 million, medicines such as Ibrance for metastatic breast cancer, a life-saving, life-changing medicine that will help over 3,000 women save over $55,000 a year. And perhaps the thing of which I am most proud during the course of this year is what, as a government, we have been able to do to assist patients with cystic fibrosis. Medicines such as Orkambi and Sindeko, which would otherwise cost over $250,000 a year, or Kalydeco at $300,000 a year. Those three medicines together will help over 1,400 patients, many of them beautiful children who would otherwise never have had the opportunity to live the rich, full life which is now before them. That's what essential services are about. That's what a strong economy is about. So as we never again face the alternative of denying people medicines which are fundamental, medicines which are essential, medicines which are life-supporting, that is the difference as to why a strong economy matters. That is the difference in terms of what we actually deliver, and that is why we do what we do.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said, and I quote, "We really want to lift the status of vocational education in Australia." But the Prime Minister cut TAFE and training funding by $326 million in just 1 year. Why does the Prime Minister keep saying things that just aren't true?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the member would be aware that funding for TAFE is provided by the states and territories. And Mr. Speaker,
the member for Sydney. The member for Sydney. The Prime Minister has the call. The member for Sydney will not interject. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member would know, funding for TAFE is provided by state and territory governments, and they make all decisions about how much they're funded by, Mr. Speaker. So the member can't come and simply say things that aren't true, because it was the member who was part of a government that cut funding for the apprenticeship scheme, Mr. Speaker, ripped money out of apprentice incentives in this country, which ensured that those who were looking for apprentices couldn't get the support. Now, Mr. Speaker, the member for Sydney is a serial offender at coming and making smears at the dispatch box about things she knows to be untrue.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Sydney is seeking to table the document.
I seek leave to table the report from the NCVER that shows that $325.8 million, a 10.6% decrease in Commonwealth funding.
The member for Sydney just needs to seek leave to table the document. Is leave granted?
Leave is not granted.
Leave is not granted. The member for Robertson has the call. Members on my left. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Training. And I too am very confident about Australia's future. So will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make it even better through its plan to create jobs for Australians? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The member for Sydney. The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And I share her optimism about the future, and so does everyone on this side of the House. We are going to back in Australian businesses, Australian industry and Australian workers. And what we have done, because we have got strong and stable leadership and we have shown responsible economic management, is that we have set up the industry conditions that businesses need to be able to grow and to create the jobs for the future. And, Mr. Speaker, there's been great news today. The October figures show that total manufacturing exports are up compared to the same time the year before. Not just by a little bit, by a huge amount. Total manufacturing exports in October were up almost $1 billion compared to the year before. That is close to 10%. That is a huge increase. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it is so disappointing that those opposite cannot applaud Australian industry and Australian manufacturing when they have come up with outstanding work and outstanding
Member for
effort.
Cooper.
It's just shameful. But do you know why, Mr. Speaker? I know why they can't do it, because they've lost touch with the Australian people and the Australian workers. The Morrison government is the government for small businesses and the Australian worker. Now, I was asked about alternative approaches, Mr. Speaker, and what I can say is that there's actually no alternative policies coming from those opposite. Not one. Not one.
Members on my left, the Leader of the Opposition. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no way that they can continue to maintain and claim that they support Australian workers, because the evidence is really clear that they don't. All you took to the election was a policy that was going to tax the Australian worker more than what they already were. but we actually took policies to the election, and we have been implementing those policies now to make sure that we grow the economy and we create the jobs of the future. So, Mr Speaker, we will continue to support businesses, we will continue to grow the economy, we will continue to create jobs, while those opposite could not grow weeds in a greenhouse.
Members on both sides. Member for Paterson. Member for Fremantle and Chifley, your Deputy Leader is waiting for you to cease interjecting. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why does the Prime Minister believe that he shouldn't be subject to the normal rules of integrity and accountability, demonstrated by his failure to answer questions about why he prevented any member speaking on his union-bashing bill today, why he has repeatedly misled the parliament, why he interfered in a New South Wales police investigation into one of his own ministers, why he was sacked as CEO of Tourism Australia, and why he invited his mentor, Brian Houston, to the White House?
The Prime Minister has the call.
No policy. No policy or smear.
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I reminded members during the course of the question time earlier this week that this is question time. It's not smear time. And for the member to come in the way that he has—
Members on my left.
—and just seek to cast a member—
The Prime Minister will pause for a second. The level of interjections is ridiculously high. A number of members have been mentioned and warned. Just to be very clear about it, I won't allow a wall of noise to interrupt question time. I'm issuing a general warning. What that means, for those who haven't experienced it before, is I'll exercise my authority under Standing Order 94A without a warning, and it also means if I move to name someone, the warning is now. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So I reject the smears that have been put by those opposite in framing that question, and I would invite them to put questions about matters of policy, matters of aged care, as we already have from one of the members, which I'm happy to take, Mr Speaker, and I think that was a very important issue for the member to raise. And, Mr Speaker, if all this Leader of the Opposition has is smears and accusations and dramatising this parliament, if that's all this Leader of the Opposition has, Mr Speaker—
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, it was a very direct question
about
a range of evasions that this Prime Minister has had.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat with the range of topics covered in the question. I can't, and the nature of the question going, to the Prime Minister, I can't at all see how he's not being relevant to the question. You simply cannot ask a question like that, that's very broad in nature, and then try and insist that there be a very narrow answer. The Prime Minister is in order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So if all the Leader of the Opposition has got is grubby smears, and if that's, Mr Speaker, how he wishes to define himself as a Leader of the Opposition, then I think the Australian public will see this Leader of the Opposition for what he is. Mr Speaker, all this Leader of the Opposition is demonstrating to the Australian people is he's like those who would seek to glue themselves to buses and trucks and various things. If you want to know what those who just seek to disrupt the ordinary, everyday activities of Australians look like, Mr Speaker, when they grow a little older, you only need to look at this Leader of the Opposition. The protest T-shirt, Mr Speaker, may be a little tighter than it was many years ago, but this is just a very angry man. A very angry man, Mr. There he goes. Come on, Captain Angry.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The members for Isaacs and Ballarat will leave under Standing Order 94A. The Leader of the Opposition is seeking my call.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister is making a number of personal accusations against me. He's the one that shut down the Parliament
The Leader of the
earlier
Opposition
today.
will resume his seat. Unfortunately, I think what the record will show is the question made a number of accusations and the Prime Minister's making some in return. That tends to happen. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. So I understand the Leader of the Opposition is very angry, Mr. Speaker. And he's very angry because the government is standing up for those who do not want to see thuggery and bullying as part of their workplace, particularly against women, Mr. Speaker. The Labor Party like to talk big about these issues, but when it comes to calling them to account and asking them to outlaw thuggish and bullying behaviour in this country, Mr. Speaker, then this is their reaction. Smears and accusations, even attacking people's faith. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not intimidated by the Leader of the Opposition or any of the Labor Party members, Mr. Speaker. No, that's what you did. No, that's what you did.
The Prime Minister has resumed his seat. No, if members all stop, I haven't called you yet. I have not called you yet. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. I will call the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister just made a jibe against the opposition and against individual members of the opposition that is deeply personal, that he should be above that one and it should be withdrawn.
Members on my left, the member for Lyons will leave under Standing Order 94A, as will the member for Corangamite. Just going to say to the Manager of Opposition Business, as strong language as it was, because of the nature of it, I was listening very carefully, and what I have to say is that whilst that was very strong language, I know the Manager of Opposition Business has asked for that to be withdrawn. I can't think of an example where, as strong as that accusation was, it has been withdrawn. I can't, but I'm just saying to the— I'm happy to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr. Speaker, you will find instances where, for the dignity of the House, a Speaker has given someone the opportunity that it would assist the House if they withdrew, and I can assure you it would assist the House if the Prime Minister withdrew.
The Manager of Opposition Business. The Leader of the House, sorry. Yeah.
Which went directly to the issue of the Prime Minister's faith by nominating the name of a church
leader. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business and others interjecting does not help. I want to hear— I didn't hear the last part of the Leader of the House, so I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
The question specifically contained an inference with respect to faith because it nominated someone who is a church
Members
leader,
on my left.
who is a church leader of a particular faith.
I'm just saying, in my consideration of this matter, I don't agree that that inference was there, but the statement the Prime Minister made was a very general one, where he said people had questioned his faith. Now, the difficulty I'm in— no, I mean, I don't need the member for Cowan, nor can I suggest as the Manager of Opposition Business. And I mean, I'm not in a position to judge where no one's questioned his faith. I mean, I'm not in a position to judge that. I agree it was very, very strong language, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two issues. First, in terms of what the question went to. The question went specifically to areas where the Prime Minister has failed to answer questions. That's right. And then it gave a list of examples. All of those are well and truly in the public domain. Secondly, it would assist the dignity of the House if the Prime Minister was given the opportunity to withdraw.
Obviously, on a very robust day like this, there are instances where the minister's not helping. I listened very carefully to the Prime Minister, and the Manager of Opposition Business is right that there have been occasions where people have been told it would assist the House, the dignity of the House. There have been a number of occasions today where if things hadn't been said it would have assisted the dignity of the House, or if they'd been withdrawn. I'm not going to require a withdrawal. I am going to say there are other means open to members, including if they think that is a misrepresentation, to take that. But I can think of many, many examples of very tough language like that, and I will say it was tough, but many examples of that have occurred, and it wasn't, had it been the case that it was very personalised and went directly to the person, that would be a different matter, and on that I caution all members speaking. The Prime Minister's concluded his answer. You've got 22 seconds.
In the matters you've raised, the reason I won't withdraw this, Mr Speaker, is because those opposite have been engaged in that tactic against me as Prime Minister for some time now. I will stand up for what I believe in, and I will stand up for my beliefs.
The member for Herbert.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations. I too am confident about Australia's future. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to make it even better through its plan to protect Australian workers? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Leader of the House and Attorney General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And the other group of people that we will stand up for are the people who are routinely bullied and harassed and intimidated on construction sites around Australia. And the Ensuring Union Integrity Bill is specifically designed to protect people, which have included female inspectors, health and safety inspectors, apprentices, subbies, contractors, small business people who have been bullied and harassed and intimidated. These people deserve the protection of an appropriate legislative scheme, which is what is contained in the Ensuring Integrity Bill. And we've heard from members opposite today, great champions of democracy that they are. We've heard them today criticise this government for dealing with this issue by moving the legislation through this parliament. And yesterday, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Minister tried to move a motion which would have had the effect of banning this parliament from dealing with the Ensuring Integrity Bill until the date 1 July 2022. Tried to move a motion that would have banned this parliament dealing with a bill which is meant to protect people on work sites for 2.5 years. Now that doesn't sound terribly democratic, does it? No. And in fact, yesterday what they gave was the clearest indication that they have no interest in debating a bill which seeks to protect people on work sites across Australia, because they wanted to ban the parliament from dealing with it at all in any way for 2.5 years. What a strange thing for a member of parliament to do, to try and move a motion to ban parliament from dealing with a bill. And why on earth do you think that that might happen? The answer is that this bill goes specifically and directly to the behaviour of the CFMEU, specifically and directly to the behaviour of an organisation that's racked up $16 million worth of fines for over 2,200 offences. And what is also notable about the CFMEU, they have given $14 million to the Labor Party. The outrage that we saw this morning, that's what it's about. The more outrage you show, the more the money flows into the Labor Party. The more you try and ban Parliament from dealing with this problem by banning Parliament from dealing with the bill that will solve the problem, the more the money flows, Mr Speaker. And ultimately, that is what it is all about. And a big wad of that money comes from the Victorian branch of the CFMEU, led by a man who has committed contempt of court, assault police, willful trespass, resist arrest, coercion, and you'd always seem to have room to take his money. The attorney's time has concluded.
The member for Solomon will leave under Standing Order 94A, and I call the member for Hindmarsh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Emissions Reduction. How can the minister expect this House to believe that he downloaded a fraudulent document from the City of Sydney website when we all know he's been misleading this House since the day he arrived and falsely claimed he went to university with Naomi Wolf and that she hates Christmas? The minister has always known this was false, so why won't he just do the decent thing and correct the record?
The Minister for Emissions Reduction.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, of course I recall seeing and meeting Ms Wolf at New College in Oxford during my time there. She began her studies there. She began her studies there in the mid-80s and she finished at Oxford only a couple of years ago, Mr Speaker. Now, my speech to the parliament 6 years ago did not say she was involved in the war on Christmas. But, Mr Speaker, I want to say this. Her accusation of anti-Semitism is wrong and deeply offensive to me and my family. Mr Speaker, my grandmother was Jewish, and my belief in Judeo-Christian values is deeply held. I call on her to apologise for these unsubstantiated and outrageous accusations.
Members on my left.
And outrageous allegations. And Mr Speaker, the fact that the Labor Party has attached itself to anti-Semitic accusations shows you just how low they're prepared to go.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes. From where it came is beyond me, Mr Speaker.
No,
this minister just accused us of being anti-Semitic.
Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition. Members on my left. The Leader of the House. The Leader of the House has the call.
No point of order has been nominated. What standing order is he seeking to raise?
He wasn't raising a point of order. That last statement does need to be withdrawn. The Minister.
I withdraw.
The member for Mallee.
Members
on my left. The member for Mallee.
My question is for the Minister for Water Resources, Drought, Rural Finance, Natural Disaster and Emergency Management. I join my colleagues to declare that I too am confident about Australia's future.
Very confident.
Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is working to make it even better through its plan to support farmers experiencing drought and by backing Australian agriculture? And is the Minister aware of any other alternatives?
The Minister for Water has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Mallee for her question? The electorate of Mallee has been severely impacted by this drought that has spread like a cancer, starting up in Queensland, right down the east coast into Tasmania and now into WA. And that's why our government's National Drought Strategy has 3 pillars. It's about delivery, real delivery to people on the ground. The first pillar is around the here and now, putting money into farmers' pockets, understanding they need support right now. And that comes through farm household allowance, giving them the dignity and respect they deserve to be able to buy household items, but also complementing it now with Regional Investment Corporation loans to allow people to refinance up to $2 million from their financial institution to the Regional Investment Corporation, taking interest and repayments out of the bank's pockets and putting it back into farmers' pockets. Nothing to pay in interest or repayments for 2 years, but also the opportunity to recover when it does rain, to restock and to replant as quickly as they can, because it takes time for cash flow to recover. That's complemented by rural financial counsellors on the here and there on the ground, helping them fill it out. Our second pillar is about the community, understanding the drought extends past the farm gate into these communities that support them. And in our last package of drought support, we put over $400 million in additional stimulus to get tradies going and to procure the materials out of local hardware stores, to make sure that when the funding and the spending from farmers dries up, that the government is there to stimulate those economies. It's also about ensuring and understanding it flows into those other workers in those communities that are doing it tough. And we have the Drought Community Support Program that's putting $3,000 to help people, particularly at this time of the year through Christmas, through the Salvation Army and Vinnies. And the third pillar is about the future. We're the first government that's looking to the next drought, because the next drought starts the first day after it rains again. And we've done that already with over $500 million a year in support through farm management deposits, tax write-offs, but now with the Future Fund, a $5 billion fund, giving a $100 million dividend every year. And that fund, the plan will be placed in Parliament in the coming months. Also, with respect to building water infrastructure, and today, to make sure that the delivery of all these programs, totalling more than $8 billion in commitment, is done properly. We're extending the work that Shane Stone has done in the North West Queensland flood, the amazing work that he's done. We're now extending his expertise, his team's expertise, to making sure that we deliver this for the drought. And this is not just having people in Canberra, this will be people out on the ground, making sure that this over $8 billion that the Australian taxpayer is putting to support our farmers is spent properly, and holding the states to account for their responsibility. We have confidence in Australia, but we have confidence in regional and rural Australia to get through this drought, because this government, this nation, will stand with them to make sure that we get there when it rains.
Before I could, the member for Greenway just take a seat for a second. The member for Shortland has returned after his 1-hour suspension. I require him to withdraw his last comment unreservedly. The member for Shortland.
I withdraw.
No, a withdrawal is fine. The member for Shortland will resume his seat. The member for Greenway.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that today he sacked 5 departmental secretaries but kept the disgraced Minister for Emissions Reduction in his job?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm happy to address the first part of that question, and the second part of that question again just contained another ugly smear from the opposition, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left.
This is what they have done all day, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left. The Prime Minister.
They today have shown themselves to be an angry rabble, Mr Speaker. They have remained angry since the 18th of May, and the people they're most angry at are the Australian people, because the Australian people rejected them at the last election for their higher taxes, their soft policies on border protection, Mr Speaker, and their lack of faith in the Australian people to get on and keep more of what they earn. But, Mr Speaker, what I did today in announcing a restructure of the Australian public service is to make sure the public service is focused on Australians, that they are focused and have a clear line of sight between the work they do and the needs of Australians on the ground. It is true, I reduced the number of departments from 18 down to 14. It was in fact Bob Hawke who did something similar when he also knew that the public service had to be more focused on the delivery of services to the Australian people. They're the sorts of reforms this country needs, because I respect and value, Mr Speaker, the excellent work of our public service, and I want to give them the right structure that enables them to deliver on the services that are needed right across this country, whether it's providing services in the drought. And the Minister has just outlined the outstanding work of the North Queensland Livestock Recovery Agency, which will now be given a broader charter and responsibility for assisting and the recovery and assisting farmers and rural communities through the drought. But the other thing we've done is we've connected education, skills and employment, Mr Speaker, so we have whole-of-life training, whole-of-life education, and understanding the equipping that we give to people in this country of whatever age through our education education or vocational or in-work training system is all designed to get them into a job and keep them in a job at whatever age they're at, and to ensure that our communications, Mr Speaker, is linked with our infrastructure program, and particularly ensure that it's connected to our regional development agenda. We are ensuring, Mr Speaker, that our Human Services Department, as it was formerly known, is part of the broader social services portfolio, and through the work of the Minister for Government Services can get those services to people on the ground. Mr Speaker, it's important that we have a public service that is supported by the government to get the job done, and that's why I took the decisions I took today. I expect our government to work for the Australian people, and we do, and I am ensuring the Australian public service is lean and mean and focused on the job of delivering for Australians, Mr Speaker.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
Members on my left.
Australia is the best country in the world. How is the Morrison government working to make it even better to secure Australia's future?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Lindsay for her question, and I share her optimism and confidence, like all the members of this side of the House, because I know the Australian people are optimistic, Mr Speaker, and I know they're confident about their future. And I know that, Mr Speaker, because they have decent, honest aspirations, and we are backing them in to achieve those aspirations. That's what we took to the Australian people at the last election. And every day our government goes to work to back in Australians who are quietly going about their business, and they will continue to get their support, Mr Speaker. They're not interested in the Canberra Games, Mr Speaker. They're not interested in the drama and all the other nonsense that can happen out of this place. What they're interested in is a government that's getting on with a job. Under our government, Australians have been getting jobs, Mr Speaker. 202,700 new jobs to date in this calendar year alone, and 251,800 jobs over the past year, and more than 1.4 million jobs since we first came to government. Australians have been earning more, and they're keeping more of what they earn because we believe in lower taxes, Mr Speaker, and we have delivered those lower taxes. We are acting to reduce the emissions in our economy, carbon emissions, and our emissions are coming down, and our emissions are lower than at any time they were under the previous Labor government, Mr Speaker. We are cleaning up the environment with practical, meaningful action to protect our land, to ensure that Australians that depend on the land, on our seas, on our fisheries, on our waterways, can ensure they get the support they need to go about their business. Our veterans are receiving an $11.5 billion in services and support this financial year. Our investment in essential medicines has led to the listing of over 2,200 new or amended items on the PBS at an overall cost of $10.7 billion. And we are delivering on the $100 billion infrastructure program, having just brought forward $3.8 billion into the forward estimates and $1.8 billion into this year and next year alone to ensure we're investing in the economy. But next year, Mr Speaker, I'm looking forward to passing the Ensuring Integrity Bill in the other place, ensuring that union thugs have no place in our workforce. I'm looking forward to following through on the funding commitments that we've given and are fully funded in our budgets in health, which includes an extra $31 billion through the 2020 National Health Agreement, and expanding support to some 500,000 participants through the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I'm absolutely looking forward to ensure that we have a Religious Discrimination Act in this country that protects the beliefs of Australians, Mr Speaker, for whatever faith or non-faith they have in this country. I'm looking forward to continue to engage our partners around the world to put Australia's national interests first, getting our spending to 2% of GDP, ensuring the stable and certain management of our economy means we can guarantee.
The Leader of the House with papers.